The captain of that flight, a woman with 4 gold stripes on her shoulder and 20,000 hours in the air, stepped out of the cockpit in the middle of my worst public humiliation, looked down at my little girl asleep against my chest, and went so pale and so still that the entire cabin stopped breathing. She was supposed to be the most powerful person on that aircraft, calm, untouchable, in command of 300 lives at 40,000 feet. And she was standing in the aisle staring at my 4-year-old daughter like she had seen a ghost rise up out of the dead. The flight attendant who had spent the last 20 minutes humiliating me in front of the whole plane had no idea what was happening. Neither did I. I thought I was just a broke single dad being put in his place, the way the world had been putting me in my place my whole life. What I did not know was that my sleeping daughter's face was about to answer a question that had haunted that captain for 4 years, and that what happened in the next 10 minutes would change 3 lives in that cabin forever. But before I tell you what the captain saw, do me one quick favor. If you have ever been the person that gets treated like you don't belong, like you're a problem to be managed instead of a human being, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people the world looks down on. Go on, I'll wait. Now, let me back all the way up. Because to understand why a flight captain went white at the sight of my daughter, you first have to understand a cheap seat at the back of a plane, a little girl who would not let go of a stuffed elephant, and the worst and best flight of my entire life. My name is Marcus Bell. I am 36 years old, and I work 2 jobs to keep a roof over my daughter's head. In the mornings, I load trucks at a warehouse. In the evenings, I clean an office building downtown. I sleep when I can. I have never had money, and I have stopped expecting to. I grew up rough, and I learned early how the world sorts people, who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets watched in a store, who gets called sir and who gets called buddy. In that voice, that means the opposite of friendly. But I will tell you something I figured out a long time ago. The people who get looked down on learn to read a room faster than anybody. We have to. We learn to feel the temperature of a place the second we walk in, to know who's safe and who's not, to brace before the unkindness comes. And it taught me something most comfortable people never learn. It taught me that how a person treats someone who can do nothing for them is the only true measure of who they are. Everything else is a performance. That, right there, is most of the story. Everything else is just details. I am raising my daughter alone. Her name is Rosie, and she is 4 years old, and she is the entire reason my heart still beats. Her mother, my wife Anna, died when Rosie was just a baby. I'm going to tell you a little about that, because it matters in a way you can't see yet, so hold on to it. Anna died when Rosie was only a few months old. It was sudden, and it was senseless the way these things are, and it left me alone with an infant and a grief so big I did not think I would survive it. But you survive it. You survive it because a baby needs feeding at 2 in the morning, whether your heart is broken or not, and somewhere in the rocking and the not sleeping, the surviving quietly turns into a life. So it has been me and Rosie for almost 4 years. She is a bright, funny, stubborn little thing, and she carries a stuffed gray elephant named Peanut everywhere she goes, and she has her mother's exact face. That part matters. Remember it. Rosie looks so much like Anna that sometimes, in a certain light, it stops my breath. Same eyes, same chin, same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. It is the cruelest and kindest gift, watching my dead wife's face grow up on my living daughter. Now, let me tell you why we were on that plane, because people like me do not fly. We drive 12 hours, or we don't go. But my mother, Rosie's grandmother, the only family I had left besides Rosie, was dying. Across the country. The doctors had given her days. and I had a few $100s in savings that I'd been guarding like my life depended on it, and I spent every cent on the 2 cheapest last-minute seats I could find, at the very back of the plane by the toilets, so my daughter could meet her grandmother before she died, and so I could say goodbye to my mom. My mother and I had not had an easy life together. She'd raised me alone, too, the same way I was raising Rosie, working herself to the bone in jobs that never paid enough. And there were years when we barely spoke. Years when the weight of everything sat between us like a wall. But when Anna died, my mother was the one who showed up. She got on a bus and rode 2 days to sit with me while I fell apart. And she held that newborn baby through the nights when I couldn't. And she never once told me it would be okay, because she knew better than to lie to me. She just stayed. And now she was dying 1,000 miles away, and she had one wish left, which was to hold her great-granddaughter one time, and I was not going to let a lack of money be the reason that didn't happen. Some things you find the money for. You just do. You figure it out and you go without later. I had never flown before. I did not know the rules. I did not know the unspoken codes of who belongs in that world and who doesn't. I just knew I had to get my little girl across the country, fast, and I was scared, and I was grieving before the grief had even finished arriving, and I was wearing my one good shirt, which was not very good, carrying everything we owned for the trip in a single battered backpack. And from the moment we stepped onto that plane, one person decided I did not belong there. Her name, I would learn later, was Vanessa, and she was the flight attendant working our section at the back. I do not know what kind of day she was having. I do not know what was going on in her life, but I know what she did because the whole back of that plane saw it. It started small. It always starts small. We were a few minutes late boarding because Rosie had a meltdown at the gate, the way exhausted 4-year-olds do, and by the time we reached our seats, Vanessa was already looking at us like we were a mess that had wandered into a clean place. When I struggled to fit our one backpack into the overhead bin, she sighed loudly and said, "Sir, you need to do that faster. You're holding up the entire aircraft." Just cold. Just that first drop in temperature that someone like me feels coming a mile away. I apologized. I got us seated. I held Rosie on my lap because she was scared, and the seat next to me, which I had paid for, somehow had a problem with the seatbelt, and I figured I'd sort it out once we were in the air. I just wanted to be invisible. That is my whole strategy in places like that. Be small, be quiet, give no one a reason. It did not work. About 20 minutes into the flight, Rosie got hungry. I had not been able to afford the food at the airport, those $18 sandwiches that cost more than I make in 2 hours of loading trucks. So I had packed her a little container of crackers and some cut-up fruit from home in a plastic bag. And when I took it out and started feeding her, Vanessa appeared in the aisle like I'd set off an alarm. "Sir, you can't have outside food on this aircraft," she said, loud enough for the rows around us to hear. That is not true, by the way. You can absolutely bring your own food on a plane. But I did not know it then. I was a man who had never flown, terrified of doing the wrong thing, and an authority figure in a uniform had just told me, in front of everyone, that I was breaking the rules. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know. She's just hungry. You'll need to put it away," she said. "If your daughter's hungry, you can purchase a meal from the cart like everyone else." And the way she said "like everyone else," I'll never forget it. It meant, like the people who belong here, not like you. I could not purchase a meal from the cart. I had spent my last dollar on the seats. I had $11 in my pocket to last me the entire trip across the country and back, and a dying mother at the end of it, and a hungry 4-year-old on my lap. And this woman was telling me, in front of 40 strangers, to buy a $12 snack box or let my child go hungry. I felt my face go hot, not with anger, with shame, the deep, old, familiar shame of being poor in a place that is not built for poor people. "Please," I said quietly, trying to keep it just between us. "I can't. The cart's too expensive for me right now. She's only 4. Can I please just give her the crackers I brought? I won't make a mess. Promise." And here is the moment the whole plane turned to look. Because Vanessa, instead of lowering her voice to match mine, raised hers. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. This is exactly why we have rules. If you can't afford to travel properly, that's not the airline's problem. Put the food away, or I'll have to note this for the captain." The cabin went quiet. The specific, horrible quiet of strangers pretending not to listen while listening to every word. I have been humiliated in my life. But there is something about being trapped in a metal tube at 40,000 feet, with your hungry child on your lap and nowhere to go, while a stranger announces your poverty to an audience. That is a special kind of awful. And Rosie, 4 years old, felt it the way children always feel these things. She did not understand the words, but she understood that a grown-up was angry at her daddy, and that her daddy had gone quiet and small, and her little face crumpled, and she buried her face in my chest and clutched Peanut and sobbed. And that somehow made it worse, because then Vanessa said, "And you'll need to keep her quiet. People are trying to rest." I want to tell you that I stood up for myself, that I had some perfect, dignified response. But I didn't. I put the crackers away. I held my crying, hungry daughter against my chest, and I whispered that it was okay, that we'd eat soon, and I stared at the seat back in front of me and I just took it, the way I had taken it my whole life. Because what else can you do? Trapped up there, powerless, with a child depending on you not to make things worse. An older woman across the aisle caught my eye and gave me a small, sad, sorry look. But she didn't say anything either. Nobody ever does. It is easier to look away. I understand it. I've looked away myself, plenty of times when speaking up would have cost me something. It's a small cowardice, and almost everybody carries it, and it's how things like this are allowed to keep happening in plain sight of 40 witnesses. And I want to be honest about what was going through my head in those minutes, because I think it's the part people who've never been poor don't understand. I wasn't angry. I wish I could tell you I was angry, that I was sitting there full of righteous fire. But that's not what poverty does to you. What it does is make you doubt yourself. A part of me sat there genuinely wondering if she was right, if I really didn't belong. If a man who couldn't buy his daughter a $12 snack box had any business putting her on an airplane at all. That's the real damage of being treated like you're less. It's not the moment itself. It's the way the moment climbs inside you and starts speaking in your own voice. Rosie cried herself out and fell asleep against me, exhausted, her face streaked with tears, Peanut crushed in her arms, her cheek against my heart. And I sat there in the cheap seat at the back of the plane, holding my dead wife's face grown small on my living daughter, grieving my dying mother, humiliated in front of strangers, with $11 in my pocket, and I thought, this is just the weather. You don't take it personally. You just hold your kid and you get through it. And then the cockpit door opened and the captain came out. I learned later why. Vanessa had in fact noted it for the captain, gone up front and reported a difficult passenger at the back, a man being uncooperative about the rules. So the captain, on a quiet stretch of the flight with the plane on autopilot and her first officer at the controls, decided to come back herself and have a look, to handle the difficult passenger. I saw her coming down the aisle and my stomach dropped. 4 gold stripes. The captain herself. I thought, now I'm really in trouble. I held Rosie a little tighter. The captain was a woman, maybe 45, with short silver-streaked dark hair and the steady, unhurried way of moving that people have when they are genuinely in command of something. Her name tag said Captain E. Hayes. She came down the aisle with Vanessa trailing behind, already explaining, "That's him, Captain, the one I told you about. He's been refusing to—" And the captain stopped at my row. And she looked down to say whatever she had come to say, and she saw Rosie's face, and everything stopped. I watched it happen, and I did not understand it. I watched this calm, commanding woman look down at my sleeping daughter's tear-streaked face, and I watched the color drain right out of her own. I watched her grip the back of the seat like the floor had moved under her. The most powerful person on that aircraft stood frozen in the aisle, staring at my 4-year-old like she was looking at someone she had loved and lost a long, long time ago. "Captain?" Vanessa said, confused. "Captain, are you—" "Be quiet," the captain said. Not loud, but in a voice that cut through everything. She knelt down, right there in the aisle, in her uniform, level with my sleeping daughter, and she looked at Rosie's face like she was trying to wake up from a dream, and when she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "What," she said, "is your daughter's name?" "Rosie," I said. My own voice barely worked. "Her name's Rosie." The captain closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them, and they were full of tears, and she said, "And her mother." What was her mother's name? And the way she said was, past tense. How did she know to use the past tense? My heart started to pound. "Anna," I said. "My wife's name was Anna. She passed away almost 4 years ago when Rosie was a baby." I swallowed. "Why? Captain, what's going on?" And Captain Hayes, 4 gold stripes, 20,000 hours, in command of 300 souls, put her hand over her mouth, and the tears spilled over, right there in the aisle in front of everyone. "Anna," she whispered. "Oh my God, Anna's daughter." I sat there, holding my sleeping daughter, while a flight captain wept in the aisle, and I had no idea what was happening, except that somehow this stranger knew my dead wife's name before I said it. "Captain," I said, "please, how do you know Anna?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand, like the tears were getting in the way of something important. She looked at me, then back at Rosie. "Can I sit, just for a minute?" "It's empty," I said. "The belt's broken, but please, sit." She sat down beside me, and for a moment she just looked at my daughter's face, and then she started to talk, low, just for me. "4 years ago," she said, "I needed blood. I was sick. I had a condition, and I needed transfusions to survive, and my blood type is rare, very rare, the kind where you can wait and the right blood just doesn't come." She took a breath. "There was a young woman who donated. A regular donor. Same rare type, and she gave again and again more than the rules even encourage, because she knew how few people could. The hospital doesn't tell you who your donor is, it's anonymous. But I survived because of that blood, and afterward I couldn't let it go. I wanted to thank whoever it was. I pushed, and eventually, because the donor had passed away and there was no privacy left to protect in the same way, a nurse, against the rules, told me a first name and showed me a photograph from the donor file." She looked at Rosie. "The donor's name was Anna," she said. "And the photograph was of a young woman with this exact face. This exact face. I have carried that picture in my mind for 4 years. The woman whose blood is the reason I am alive. The reason I am sitting in this uniform. The reason I am still here to fly this plane tonight." Her voice broke. And I never got to thank her, because by the time I found out who she was already gone. They told me she had a baby. I always wondered what happened to that baby. I lit a candle for that woman every year on the day I found out her name. And I never, ever thought I would— She stopped. She looked at me, and at Rosie, and she could not finish. Anna gave blood, I said slowly, the world rearranging itself around me. She did. She had a rare type. She always said it was her one superpower, that she could give when other people couldn't. She kept donating even after Rosie was born. She said, my voice cracked. She said somewhere out there was a person walking around alive because of her, and that was the best thing she'd ever done. I had to stop for a second because the memory came back so hard. Anna, sitting at our little kitchen table with the bandage in the crook of her elbow and that proud, tired smile she always had after a donation. She used to say it was the only thing she did that she was completely sure was good. No complications, no doubt, no way to mess it up. Just a part of herself, given freely, to someone she would never meet and never need to. She told me once that she liked not knowing who got it. She said the not knowing was the whole point, that a gift you give to a face you'll never see is the purest kind there is, because there's nothing in it for you at all. I used to think it was just a nice thing she said. I never imagined I'd one day be sitting next to the face she never saw. I'm that person, Captain Hayes whispered. Your wife saved my life. A stranger. She never knew my name and I never knew hers, and she saved my life, and now I'm sitting on a plane next to her husband and her daughter, who looks exactly like her. What are the odds? In the whole world, what are the odds? The whole back of the plane was silent now, but it was a different silence than before. People were leaning in. The older woman across the aisle had her hand over her heart, and then Captain Hayes turned, slowly, and looked up at Vanessa, who was standing frozen a few feet away, who had heard every word, whose face had gone from confusion to a dawning, sickening understanding. And here is where you might expect the captain to destroy her, to unload 4 years of meaning and a lifetime of authority onto the woman who had humiliated the husband and daughter of her own savior. I braced for it. Part of me, I'll admit, wanted it. But that is not what happened. And it is the part of this story I think about the most. Captain Hayes stood up. She was calm again, but it was a terrible kind of calm. And she said to Vanessa quietly, so the whole cabin had to strain to hear, which made it land even harder. This man and his daughter are traveling to say goodbye to his dying mother. He spent his last dollar to be on this plane, and his late wife, who that little girl is the image of, is the reason I am alive to be your captain tonight. She let it sit. You humiliated him, in front of all these people over crackers, because you decided he didn't belong here. Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I'm not going to humiliate you back, the captain said. I'm not going to do to you what you did to him, because I was raised better than that, and because I think you already understand exactly what you did. But you are going to spend the rest of this flight thinking about the fact that the man you decided was beneath you is the closest thing to family I have found in 4 years of looking. And you are going to think about how many other Marcuses you have done this to, who didn't happen to be sitting next to someone who knew their wife's name. And then she turned back to me, and the authority dropped away, and she was just a person again. Marcus, she said, I would be honored if you and Rosie would let me move you to the front of the aircraft. And I am going to bring your daughter a meal myself, and anything else she wants, and it is not going to cost you a thing. Not because of any rule, but because 4 years ago her mother gave me my whole life, and the universe just walked her daughter onto my plane. I started to cry then. I couldn't help it. A grown man in a cheap seat crying. She helped me gather our backpack and peanut, and she carried my sleeping daughter herself, gently, up the long aisle to the front of the plane, past all the staring faces, and the older woman across the aisle reached out and squeezed my arm as I passed, crying too. Now, I told you at the start that this changed 3 lives, so let me tell you how, because the plane landing was not the end of it. Captain Elena Hayes did not let us disappear when the wheels touched down. She got my number before we left that aircraft. She called the next day to ask if we'd made it to my mother in time. We had, just barely. My mother got to hold Rosie, the great-granddaughter she'd been praying to see, and she passed away peacefully 2 days later, knowing the line went on. Elena called me the day of the funeral, a woman I'd known less than a week, just to make sure I was not alone. I was, except for Rosie. So she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. In the months that followed, Elena Hayes became part of our lives in a way I still find hard to explain. She had no children of her own. She had spent her life in the air, married to the job, and she had survived a thing that makes you understand exactly how short life is. And she had been carrying 4 years of gratitude with nowhere to put it. And then Anna's daughter walked onto her plane. She became Rosie's godmother. Not by blood, but in every way that counts. She flies all over the world, but whenever she is in our city, she is at our table. She taught Rosie about airplanes. She comes to the school plays. She holds Rosie up to see out of windows and tells her that her mother is the reason all of this exists, that a woman Rosie barely got to meet reached out across the whole world and saved a stranger's life. I remember the first time Rosie really understood it. She was 5 by then, and Elena had brought her a little set of toy wings, the kind they give kids who visit the cockpit, and Rosie asked her, in that direct way small children have, why she loved her so much when she wasn't even her real family. And Elena knelt down, the way she had knelt in that aisle, and she said, "Because your mommy gave me a part of herself, so I could keep living a long time ago, before you were even born, and I've been waiting my whole life to find a way to say thank you. And then I found you." And Rosie thought about that very seriously, the way she thinks about everything, and then she just hugged her. Rosie is going to grow up knowing exactly who her mother was. Not just from me, from a person whose entire life is living proof of Anna's goodness, standing right there in front of her in a uniform with gold on the shoulders. And here is the part where I made the choice that I think matters most. A few weeks after that flight, the airline contacted me. Word had gotten around the way these things do. Some other passengers had written in about what happened. The airline was, in their words, deeply concerned, and they wanted to make it right. They offered me a settlement. A genuinely large amount of money, plus free flights for life, in exchange for signing some papers and, I understood clearly enough, not making any more of a story out of it than it had already become. And I thought about that money for a long time, because $11 in my pocket and 2 jobs and a 4-year-old will make you think hard about money. It would have changed our lives. I won't pretend I didn't sit at my kitchen table that night and do the math over and over of what that settlement would mean. No more 2 jobs, no more lying awake counting bills. Rosie in a better school, a real bed, a real future. Every reason in the world to sign was sitting right there in front of me, and only one reason not to. But that one reason turned out to weigh more than all the others put together. But I told them no. I told them I did not want their settlement. I told them I had not been humiliated on that plane so I could turn it into a payout. And then I told them the only thing I actually wanted, the one thing, in exchange for never saying another word about it. I asked them not to fire Vanessa. There was a long silence on the phone. The woman from the airline asked if she'd understood me correctly. "You heard me," I said. "Don't fire her. I know that's probably what's coming with all the attention. Don't. I've spent my whole life being treated like she treated me, and I have watched what it does to a person to be made an example of and thrown away. It doesn't teach them anything. It just makes them bitter, and then they pass it on to the next person down the line. I took a breath. She had a bad day, and she did a cruel thing, and she got caught in the worst possible way, in front of the one person who could see exactly how cruel it was. I watched her face when she understood. She already got the only lesson that ever actually works. If you fire her, you waste it. Keep her. Let her be the flight attendant who never does that to anyone ever again. Because she knows now what she didn't know then. That every single person on that plane is somebody's whole world. I never took $1 from that airline. Vanessa kept her job. I don't know what became of her, not really. But Elena told me, a long time later, that she'd heard through the airline grapevine about a flight attendant who had become almost famous among the crews for the way she treated the passengers at the back of the plane. The tired ones, the poor ones, the scared first-time flyers with kids on their laps, the ones everyone else rushed past. I like to think it was her. I'll never know for sure, but I like to think it. There is a version of that flight where I take the settlement, where I let the airline pay me to make it all go away, and I fly for free for the rest of my life, and maybe it even works out fine. And there is no version of that flight where I do that, and also get to look my daughter in the eye someday and tell her that when somebody was cruel to her father chose to break the chain instead of cashing it in. Rosie is going to know that her mother saved a stranger's life by being generous to someone she'd never meet. How could I teach her that lesson, and then, the first chance I got, do the opposite? I picked the thing I could explain to my daughter. I'd pick it every single time. I still load trucks in the morning. I still clean offices at night. My life is not easy, and money is still tight, and I turned down a fortune for the sake of a principle, and there are nights I lie awake and wonder if I was a fool. But then, I think about Elena teaching Rosie the names of the clouds, and I think about Anna's blood moving through a living person who flies planes across the sky, and I think about a flight attendant somewhere being kind to a frightened father because of one bad day she'll never forget, and I think, no. I think I did all right. I think Anna would think I did all right. So, let me leave you with this tonight. A woman I never met, whose blood saved a stranger, died young, and never got to see what her kindness did. And 4 years later, that kindness reached out of the past and rescued her own husband and daughter, 30,000 feet in the air, on the worst day of their lives, by complete impossible chance. Anna never knew the captain's name, the captain never knew Anna's, and it didn't matter. The good she did kept moving long after she was gone, and it found its way home. So here is what I honestly want to know from you tonight. Has a stranger's kindness ever come back around to you when you least expected it, from a direction you never could have guessed? Or have you ever done a small, quiet, good thing for someone you'd never meet, the way Anna did, just because you could? You never know how far that kindness travels. You never know whose life it lands in, or when, or who it comes home to. Tell me your story down in the comments. I read every single one, and tonight I'd love to read yours. And if this reached you, if you believe like I've come to believe that no act of kindness is ever really lost, that it just keeps traveling until it finds the person who needs it, then do me one small favor before you go. Subscribe so the next story finds you too. Leave a like so it reaches one more person who needs to hear it tonight. And tell me about the kindness that came home to you. I'll be right here, reading every single one.